I was going to say this topic came from last week at the end of our podcast, where I made a statement about it's not as important to be loved as a bunch of other things. And you said, hey, let's talk about that next week.
And specifically, you said it's not as important to be loved by your kids. There are more important things
Right.
than your kids loving you. So I think
That's what it is.
Yeah.
That's the topic.
So I'm curious. I haven't thought about this much. I have thought about a few things, but it hasn't really been too much. I'm curious if you've got some ideas to start with, because I'm going to make a list, Cameron.
Okay. Well, let's make sure that we're clear in what we're saying. I'm not saying it's not important for you to love your kids. I think that's something you should strive to do. I'm also saying it's not necessarily always possible to love your kids. And that's coming from someone who strives to love people. And there's a couple people that I simply cannot seem to have the emotion of love, but I can still treat them with dignity and respect. And I can still do the things that I would do if I loved them without the feeling. So striving to love your kids is an important thing, but there's nowhere does it say that they should love you back. And in fact, I think if you make that your goal, you're going to fail. They're not going to love you, and you're going to make their lives a living hell.
If you try to make them love you.
If that's your number one priority, and you're just motivated by this, trying to get them to feel a specific way towards you.
Okay. I can buy into that. However, I do want to, I don't think it says in the scriptures anywhere that you have to love your kids, does it? Or, your kids have to love you. I think there's
No, in fact, one of the 10 commandments says you're supposed to honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long upon the land. It doesn't say you should love them. It talks about how to treat them. And that's independent of love. That's independent of how you feel towards them.
It's interesting you say that, because I've got a friend who, she's a friend of the family, an older lady, and she has a husband that none of us that I know like him.
Okay.
But we like the lady a lot. And some things have happened between this lady and her husband, and I've had a chance to talk with her, and she said, and I said, we don't really like the guy. Me and this group. She's like, what? I said, yeah, we've never liked this guy. He's always rubbed us the wrong way. She said, well, you've always treated him like you loved him. And I said, yeah, because we do that out of respect for you. You're the person we care about. And so, but none of us have ever liked him. There's been red flags all over the place for many of us with this guy.
Yeah.
Well, why didn't you tell me? I said, well, how do you tell somebody, right? How do you tell somebody you love that the person they love might not be, and obviously that's a judgment call, and probably in our place to judge anyway, right? Like you said, as long as we honor and respect and treat them kindly as if we love them, we don't have to have that emotion necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
So it's an interesting line.
Right.
Yeah. But I want to hear some things that are more important, should be more important to us as parents than our kids loving us.
That your kids know where you stand as far as right and wrong.
Okay.
It's more important that your kids know your priorities.
All right.
Where do your kids fall in your priorities? And this is where, and I've had lots of discussions about the whole Santa Claus thing. So if you're a young person and you believe in Santa Claus, you should probably turn this off or fast forward for a little bit.
Okay.
But um, I did not feel comfortable telling my kids anything about this thing called Santa Claus, right? Because I didn't want my kids to ever have an occasion to look back and say, well, dad lied to me. And not only did he lied to me for years. Now, I'm not judging other people. I'm weird. And I recognize that my stance is not typical. But when my kids asked me, hey, is Santa Claus real? I would ask them back, do you really want to know? And tell me why you want to know. And my second daughter, Mary, she goes, I don't want to know. And she like, she left. It was great. Everybody else was like, yeah, I want to know because people are talking and it seems like it. And I was like, have you ever heard me say that Santa Claus is real? And they think about it and they're like, no. I was like, do I ever talk about Santa Claus? No. I was like, because Santa Claus doesn't exist, but it's fun for kids and I don't want to ruin their fun on something that doesn't matter that much. So we focus in on Christ and his birth and celebrate his life and that the start of his life on earth, what it means to us. That's what we focus on. But others, they focus in on other things. So don't ruin this. Don't ruin the fun and the joy that they're going to have in imagining somebody doing something. And I liken it to going to a movie. I was like, you don't need to sit through a movie and tell the person next to you the whole time, well, that's not how it works, or that doesn't make any sense. The lights don't turn on that way. My brother in law is an engineer. We were sitting in a movie together, and they did the thing where they turned on the big old switch, and it goes clunk, and then the one row of lights turn on, clink, and then another row of light, clink, and another row of lights, clink, of the whole warehouse, and it just goes through. And he goes, "That's not the way it works." And he starts to explain it. Now he knew me. I enjoy the engineering side of things, so I was totally awesome. I found it great to find out. But a lot of people they want to be unaware. So for me, where my kids fall is unpopular with a lot of people in the same way that Santa Claus is not popular. My kids are not my number one priority. They're not my second priority. So my number one priority, which is this is tough because it's my wife, immortality. And if I add immortality, then it makes it clear. I struggle putting God before my wife. And I know I should, but being real, Kyle, I just I struggle to put God before Sarah. But if we're talking mortality, then it's really simple. Immortality, Sarah's my number one priority.
Yeah, you're preaching to the choir on this one. It's, I think, and I'll add to it a little bit by saying that I think it's more important that your kids know you love them than it is that they love you. And
That's absolute. Yeah, I love that. Let's add that to the
yeah,
list. That your kids know you love them. And do you think is there is it conditional love?
well, you know what? We can let's just be frank, and
Okay.
it should not be conditional love. But I would suggest that for every single one of us who says my love is unconditional, we might be fooling ourselves a little bit because that's a perfection kind of a thing, and that's tough, man. You know, I
Yeah.
will suggest that I have a son who's more severe on the autism spectrum, and he is difficult to say the least. And
Yeah.
you know, I would love some sort of reciprocity from him, some sort of
Yeah.
maybe even a "I love you too, Dad" in broken English, right? Or, but I
Sure.
don't get that ever.
Nope.
If I say I love you, he says okay, right? And He has said other things that I know are closer to reciprocity, but half the time he says them, I think it's repeating language he's heard because he'll
Mm-hmm.
recycle language from movies or that he's heard from other things, right? So I don't know that he understands.
Right.
And I've had a glimpse into. I will say this: a glimpse into unconditional love because I have to continue to love him even as he treats me unkind and is challenging and seems to be hell bent on making my life harder than it has to be, right? And I'm not going to
Yeah.
show you,
Yep.
but I have a big yellow spot in the middle of my chest right now. That is from a bruise. From how bruises go brown, they go brown and then they go maybe green and then yellow when they finish up. I have a
Yep.
an orange sized yellow spot in the middle of my chest right now from him physically hitting me in the chest with his hands. So,
Mm.
but I like to think I love him unconditionally, and I keep telling myself that. But
Yeah.
sometimes I don't even think I'm there with him, right? And I know my other kids, they know I love them, but they know there are conditions to me honoring their decisions, and they know there are conditions to me uh, getting along with them, and for them to get along with me, right? We have to learn to work with each other and with each other's imperfections, you know. But
Sure.
the ideal,
And there's a difference between love and
yeah,
like.
the ideal is unconditional love, and that's the perfect model, but that's a hard model to follow. I think where we got to be careful with our
Mm-hmm.
kids is making them think we'll love them more if they make better decisions, right? Our love should be standard. There
Yeah.
should be a line that my love is my love, and you'll make good decisions that make me proud of you, and you'll feel good about. There are decisions that will make me not proud of you. You won't feel good about. There's but the line of love is a standard. You know.
Yeah.
Now, if you want, I'm pretty good about reciprocating. My mom was a great.
Mm-hmm.
Let me throw my mom in the mix here because my mom
Okay.
had three sons and one daughter who were completely out of control. We were wild animals.
Wait, your your sister was out of control too?
My sister was the might have been the roughest of all of us.
Really? I had no idea.
My
Okay.
sister got suspended one time from high school because on a Saturday before, she got in a fight with two girls in the park and ripped plugs of hair out of both of their. She beat up two girls so bad in the park that when she got to school on Monday, they looked at these two poor girls and looked at my sister and they suspended her for a fight off campus.
Wow. She wasn't even on school property. The park wasn't part of the
Yeah,
school?
right. And my sister
Wow.
was fearless in her. You didn't want to be on Crystal's bad side. Crystal's my sister's name. She would,
Okay.
if you got on her bad side, I've heard stories of. Well, I'm not going to share all the stories, but anyway, the point is, I
Sure.
don't want to share too many details because she'd whoop me, and I'm kind of scared of my sister too. And I can handle myself just fine. But needless to say,
Yeah.
my mom, um, she whooped us pretty good. She was not afraid to take us on, and we wouldn't fight back with my mom. None of us, we respected her enough not to fight her back. So she would go after us with switches
Mm-hmm.
and fly swatters and belts and whatever was handy. So, um, but beyond all that, somehow I knew she loved me, right? That was a baseline that I knew, and it was because she required us to do things that I knew, and she would tell us long term, this is you got to understand how to do this to be a functional adult and to be kind and to be a good person. And so I
Yeah.
think that she showed her love in different ways. Um, I think, and she didn't care if we were her friend. You know what I mean? She was like, I don't care if
Mm-hmm.
you like me or not, because my job is not for you to like me. My job is to make sure you feel enough love to feel confidence out in the world, and I give you the discipline you need so that when you leave, you can discipline yourselves, right? She realized that if she didn't
Yeah.
discipline us, we wouldn't have discipline and we'd go out in the world and get thrown in prison. That's not something she wanted. So, I think there's a lot of different ways to show your kids you love them. I think the key is to set a standard. And I like what you said, know where you stand in right and wrong. That's a big part of, and being submissive to that mission is a big part of them knowing you love them, right? Because if you don't have your priorities and they don't know where you stand in right and wrong, then they can just think you're just being a tyrant, right? If you don't
Right.
have a
Yeah.
series of values that you adhere to, you'll be a tyrant. And my mom did. My mom had a set of values, and I knew where she stood between right and wrong. And so that allowed her to do things that maybe what I would have thought were displays of non-love, right? But ultimately, I knew
Hmm.
where she stood, and I understood that her long-term values and goals were for goodness and for to teach me. So I think that's where a lot of parents get it twisted, is maybe they haven't established the the right and wrong stance. You know what I mean? And it's tough for parents who are in different situations to do that when they're still living in the world too, right? It's kind of
Yeah.
hard to tell your kids not to have, premarital sex if you're living with somebody, right?
Sure.
And out of marriage, right? It's really hard to. So I understand there's some interesting ways of doing things, and again, what we don't want to be is tyrants, but we also don't. The opposite of that is just to be a pushover, passive, right? And if you don't have your own right and wrong stability in place, it can be tricky. I remember one time we lived across the street from a couple who had a bunch of kids, and my boys were the same age as theirs, and they would play together, and there would be conflict because that's what boys do. And I've always had this attitude of just kind of stand back and watch. I like kids to figure
Hmm.
stuff out. Sometimes they figure it out wrong, but there's a lesson in that too. But I
Sure.
don't want to. I don't want to stick my nose in everything. But the lady next door, my boys were pretty physical, and so the lady next door wasn't a fan of that. And I remember one time I was
Yeah.
watching out of the corner of my eye, and the boys were playing, and she she got really mad at one of my sons and told him it was a sin and he shouldn't be doing. And she really jumped on him, right? And
Yeah.
and my son said, uh, "Really, you're going to call me out on a sin?" He said, "Aren't you living with that?"
He talked back to
He
her.
said, "Aren't you living with a guy not
That's
married?" He's 12.
your son said that. Oh my
I don't think you
goodness.
should be calling me out on a sin. I think he said the word. The story's really funny because he said I think he threatened one of their boys and said, "I'll kick your butt." Right.
Okay.
And the boy said, "You shouldn't say the word but." And he said, "Fine, I'll kick your gluteus maximus." Right. This is what he said. And then my
Okay.
other son says,
Sure.
"Are you not entertained?" Because he heard the word Maximus, right? And that's a famous line from the movie
Right.
Gladiator. And I started cracking up, but it kind of escalated from there where she kind of got onto him. And they weren't cursing, but I think she was nervous that that would be the next step.
It would turn into
Yeah.
that.
But
Okay.
anyway, he kind of called her out and said, I don't think you need to be telling me I'm sinning when you're living with a guy you're not married to. Well, that didn't go over very well at all. But it illustrates the point of uh, we're all hypocrites, but we've got to be careful that we have at least we're working at a baseline, right? Of right and wrong, right? Even if we're not adhering to that right and wrong standard, at least we're making attempts and continuing to chase that right and wrong path. Because I think our kids know we're mistake people and we're going to make mistakes, and they'll forgive us as long as we cop up to that kind of stuff, right? But
I think a lot of them will. I think there are some kids who will not.
interesting.
They will hold their parents to a standard that's unreasonable, and that's okay. But that's my point. You don't need to get forgiveness from your kids.
Right. Yeah.
You don't need to be loved or liked by your kids. It's not important. Well, it's not as important as other things.
Right.
And I was talking to this gal. It's one of my wife's friends, and we were doing it on social media. And I said, "Could you explain to me your philosophy here, because I don't get it?" And she she was exposing her kids to what things that I would think that you should probably not expose your kids to. And so I just listened to her, and then I replied back. I was like, "Oh, okay. I thank you for explaining where you're coming from." And then she asked me, "Well, do you agree?" I was like, "Oh no, I don't agree," and that's where I left it. But I was just seeking understanding. Well, she wanted to know why I disagreed, and so I thought, okay, same thing that I needed is. So I tried to explain it, and it turned into her trying to turn my opinion to be different. Um, with our kids, you know, we're going to screw up, and we need to seek forgiveness from our Father in heaven and our kids. But it doesn't matter if our kids don't forgive us. That's that's not. You don't keep trying.
Well, we can't.
Once you've done your part,
Yeah.
you move forward.
We can't control that anyway. We can't control
Because
if other people forgive us. I mean, that's just not. And that's the other thing I think with kids. I think it's, and I've told you this, and we've talked about it. I've heard that when you parent with fear and shame and guilt, your kids will feel controlled and they will
mm-hmm,
want to escape. And I've seen this in
yep,
families over and over and over, where parents use every tool in the toolbox, including fear or shame or guilt. And the kids they're not going to have it. They won't have it. They'll feel controlled and they'll want to escape. But
yeah.
when you parent with kindness and patience and love, kids feel empowered and they'll want to excel generally, right? There's always going to be
Yeah,
always going to be an
and
outlier for sure.
there's a place for fear in
Of
parenting.
course, yeah. When it makes
Um,
sense, yeah,
there for safety things like the kid running into the road, you yell
yeah,
at them.
right.
But here's the problem: if you're constantly yelling about everything, then when they're headed towards the street and they hear you yell, there's no contrast, so they're going to keep going. So if you use fear, use it sparingly, and for those things that cannot be repaired. Okay, when a life is taken, a major injury happens, you better. That's what you use fear for. Okay, it's not for your convenience. It's for their safety and their benefit that you would use fear. And if you use it sparingly, it can be a very effective tool. One time, my son, he went around after he left the house in the middle of the night, and him and his friend went around to neighborhood windows and knocked on the windows. Now, we had some people in the neighborhood that were a little odd and did not perceive reality in the same way that I perceived reality. I think they might have been diagnosed with some mental illness, and they had weapons. They were paranoid about the police. They were paranoid about everything. The first day I met him, he showed me his scar by pulling down his pants where he had been shot. Okay. Just not the typical fella. And so
Can
when
you
I
stand,
found out that
can you stand up and kind of show us where that might have been personally, just real quick? Sorry,
you bet. I'll do that in just a second. Not at all. Never.
I had to
Yeah.
break it up a little bit there.
The funny thing is, Kyle, the funny thing is, I was telling a neighbor, I was like, hey, we're kind of new in the neighborhood. That guy, like, he pulled down his pants and was showing me a scar. And the guy's like, the best part of that is he says that he was shot, right?
Yeah.
I was like, yeah. And he goes, he shot himself. He holstered incorrectly and shot himself in the leg. Um, anyway,
Well, now he says
so
now he's got street cred.
yeah, and that's what you want, right? But I imagine my son going and knocking on his window and what his response would have
Right.
been. Okay. So I used fear, and my son had a flat effect. He didn't show emotion. And so I kept pushing and pushing, trying to get some kind of signal from him that he understood, until finally he went pale and he passed out.
Was he holding his breath?
Now,
What was that, Cameron?
he just, when I started to, I mean, I hit what could have happened, then I didn't get a response from him, so I hit harder what could have happened, and then I went extreme on what could have happened. And then next thing I know, pale and out.
Yeah.
He actually went down.
He felt the
So
true fear of that possible outcome. Yeah. Yeah. And I
he
agree.
sure did.
Yeah. I agree with that.
I could have stopped beforehand, but I used fear. I wish I had had a signal that he had gotten it, because then I would have stopped
Yeah.
earlier. But
How
there
about this,
was no
Cameron?
signal, so I kept
You
going.
just opened up a can of worms here because
Okay.
because I know a family whose mom would use God and the fear of hell against her kids to
Uh-huh.
try and coerce their behavior. And and that
Yeah.
is a real thing, right? I mean, um, I'm curious on what you think of that.
Well, I'll tell you what. If someone's preaching fire and brimstone, I say that's fine for you, but I teach mercy and grace and the atonement of Jesus Christ. And the way I approach it is, hey, we're all going to make mistakes in this life. This is how you turn back. And in the scriptures, there's a pattern that you can see. And one of my favorite stories is the story of Enoch, sorry, and then another of Alma the Younger. And they both describe having a memory brought back from the language of their fathers. In other words, the way that their parents taught, the way that their parents spoke, allowed them, when they were reflective on their own life, they could recognize how to get right with God again. And it's not through just changing behavior, it's actually through the atonement of Jesus Christ. It's through his redemptive power
Right.
and accepting him as your Lord and Savior. That's how you get right with God. You don't stop doing a behavior and think that's going to save you. That's great. You should stop the behavior, but that's not anyway. So for fire and brimstone, hey, you know what? I I just focus on something else. I'm trying to get my kids to know how to avoid it, and how down the road, if they ever choose to go their own path, I'm okay with that, because they're not just my kids, they're also God's kids. And what he does with my time here on earth, what his work is to bring to pass the immortality, which Christ did through his resurrection, and the eternal life, or the returning to God. And that's through the atonement and be making everything whole again. So he spends my time here on earth. His work is to make it possible for me to return. And he does that for my kids too. So I'm also the guy who wasn't always the best Christian that I could have been. So when someone is choosing a path that's different than what the standard is, and it's not my standard, it's God's standard, right? As far as I understand the standard, that's coming from God. And if someone's deviating, I have a great amount of hope for them. I think they're going to be okay, because I know God's working really hard to bring them back to him. And that's I can help them deal with the consequences, and it's okay if they're not there today or tomorrow. I have great amounts of hope that Christ's atonement will be applied in their life, and they will have that testimony that Christ is their savior.
I just wrote down
So,
one
yeah.
I love that because as you were talking, I just wrote down, I have know where you stand between right and wrong is the first one we had. The next one is
Yep.
prioritize. They know your priorities and where do they fall. The third one is love them. They need to know that you love them. That's more important than them loving you. And I wrote down as you were talking, they need to know the source of your happiness and hope and joy. That is more important
Oh,
than you.
yeah.
And you just described to me, um, one of my pet peeves when I was a kid. I grew up in the church, and people kept, or they made me feel like they kept telling me. Maybe they never said it, but I felt like if if following Christ and trying to do what's right should make you happy, then why do none of my teachers who are teaching me, why do they not seem happy? Why am I watching all these adults around me who are walking around looking like they're beaten down by the world? Why are they not smiling? If following God's principles is supposed to make you happy, why are they unhappy? And
Yeah.
that was my internal battle that I faced as a kid. And and
Sure.
and looking back, it took me years to recognize this, but my dad was the source of happiness, and I knew he was happy. And he had a lot of responsibility, he had a lot of weight on his shoulders, but I watched him close enough to see that he was happy and that the gospel made him happy. And so, the idea that our kids need to know the source of our happiness and our hope and our joy, wherein it lies,
Hmm.
I think is a powerful, is much more important than them loving us, right? Because then they can tap into that same resource. Before, I don't know if I've told you this, Cameron, but before Shelly passed away, I went and saw her at the hospital on a Friday night, and
Yeah.
I knew she was going to pass away. I just could see that this was not going well, and she was. I could see it. I knew it, and so I called on my kids to the house. I don't think they had any idea how dire the situation was. But I asked
Hmm.
my two sons that live away from house. I asked them to come over on Friday night, and I had all my kids around me. And I told them, I said, "Your mother and I have faced some challenges, but no matter what has challenges we faced, no matter what outcomes we saw, no matter what tragedies or trials we've seen, we have always turned to God in those moments. And it's a pattern that she and I have created that has created our happy family." And I remember telling the kids, no matter what happens with your mom, I am going to turn to God, and I'm hoping you'll join me. I hope you'll join me no matter what happens. Turn to God, right? When things get hard. And it's easy not to do sometimes when we feel mad at God, right? God can stop this. God could have saved her. And so it became a challenging thought process to battle those feelings, right? And
Hmm.
I think them understanding the source, and hopefully we're projecting some sort of happiness and joy, or you know endurance, whatever it is. I know not everybody can be bubbly and happy, but it's not a bad idea to let your kids see you when you are happy, or at least tell them. I might not express it outwardly. I know not everybody's outwardly expressing that, but to let them know where in your the source of your hope and joy lies in that resource, the Savior. So I think that's probably important, more important to me, and I know you would agree, than them loving me, right? And this all stems from,
Yeah.
for those that didn't hear us last week, I think this all stems from, I came across, and I work with a lot of parents who are facing challenging kids, and I've come across moms who've worked so hard with their kids, put everything they had into their kids, and their kids turn 18, and then and they can leave and they run away as fast as they can from their parents, or the relationship is damaged somehow, and the mom or the dad will say, we put all of our heart and soul and effort into these kids, and this is our reward, and it's painful, right?
Yeah.
Or they spend all their time wanting to be loved by their kids, and their kids just don't reciprocate, right? And their kids, they don't know necessarily how to do that, or they're learning, right?
Nope.
Yeah. They don't
That's right.
they're not adults. They don't. And frankly, I told my son this the other day. He turned 30, my oldest son. And he said, it's weird. I feel like an adult now. And I said, yeah, don't get it twisted. He said, what? I said, you're not even close to an adult until you have a kid. Then it all changes. Then you can talk about
That's
being
awesome.
married. You can do all these things. You can accomplish all kinds of things in this world. But the minute you have a kid, then you have to become an adult because you have some responsibilities. You got weight. You got, right. And he laughed about that,
Hmm.
but he realized that there's that comes with it, right? And the idea behind, why are we talking about more important things than your kids loving you, is it's risky to for that to be your number one overriding goal, is for your kids to love you, right? Because then all your decisions become decisions
Are based on
are
that.
based on that. That becomes your baseline, right?
Yeah.
And so, you know, it's really imperative that we have a baseline that's above and beyond our kids. Even our wives, and I struggled the same way you did,
Yeah.
Cameron. It's hard to put God above my wife. I mean, it's
Yep.
not as hard now, but I feel like I'm doing both. But it was hard back then.
Yeah.
You
Hmm.
but by doing that, by putting God above your wife, you're establishing a baseline that's submissive to the goal, right? And you can
Yeah.
both be submissive to the goal of God, and then you don't have to be submissive to each other as much as you're submissive to, and you end up being that because of that goal together, right? And so
Yeah.
that's why we're
Hmm.
talking about this. So we have 4 items now. Know where you stand between right and wrong. Where do your kids fall in your priorities? Make sure they know you love them, and make sure they know the source of all your happiness is more important than them loving you. Is there anything? I mean, I'm curious. There, you wouldn't think there'd be a whole lot of things, you know, but these are 4 good ones that seem to stand apart a little bit. Can you think of anything else, Kim?
I like these because they're principle based, but here's some specifics that people don't like.
Okay.
Date night. Date night is more important than my kids.
Ah,
It's more important than their concerts. It's more important than their sports events.
okay. That kind of falls.
But once again, exactly, it goes back to where they fall in the priority list.
Right,
And Sarah is number one
right.
in mortality, and they're my parents are above my kids. Now that sounds that sounds bizarre, but I have a commandment to honor my father and my mother, not to you know I also have a duty based to provide, protect, and preside. And with my wife as our in our union, we're supposed to do a bunch of nurturing. But if my kids have an event and my parents have a need, I meet the needs. Now, if my kids are going to go hungry or my parents are going to go hungry, that's a different story. So I guess my kids do win on that one. But it's this whole uh, you use worksheets. I use flowcharts. I have a, well, where does this fall, and then it goes over here, and I get to my answer, and the plinko disc that's bouncing around going to the different spots. I just can follow that down. But my kids, it's more important for my kids to understand the reasoning behind my answers than it is for them to like my answers.
Okay. And
So I'll spend a lot of time like,
go ahead.
go ahead.
Go ahead.
So last night, my daughter, she's 16 years old. She's going away for a camp. Actually, she's on the road right now, headed there. Last night, she's in summer school because she wants to do a bunch of music stuff and a bunch of college stuff while in high school. So preemptively, we've put her into summer school so that she can get even further ahead. Why? Because she has goals and we're going to support her in her goals. Well, last night she came in. She needs to finish her summer school before she goes on this trip because she won't have the opportunity to do any more with it. She came in and she said, "Hey, because the house is so noisy, I want to go to Walmart with my friend, go shopping, then go to her house, which is quiet, and finish my homework." Well, my lovely wife had just gotten back from taking our boys away from the house for 2 hours so the house would be quiet so that she could record her half-hour speech or her half-hour talk for her speech class or whatever it was. And so my wife's like, "What? You should be done." And my wife just goes down all of these things and says that's, totally doesn't answer my daughter's question, which was, "Can I go to my friend's house?" So then my wife says, because I'm in the room, she goes, "What do you think, Cameron?" And I said, "Well, I think that the reason your mom's giving you all of these answers is because you started off with a false premise. You don't need our house to be quiet to do the homework. You had an opportunity to do the homework. It's not going to help you do your homework more by being at your friend's house the night before you're going on this trip. But it sounds like fun, and I think you should do it." And she was like, "What?" I was like, "I think you should go. I think it sounds like fun and you should go, but you shouldn't go for these reasons because those reasons are false. You should go because it sounds like fun." And she was just like, I don't know what to do now because she has to justify or rationalize what she does as being good, moral, virtuous, and that makes it okay to do. For some reason, fun is not good enough. So I talked to her for quite a while and I said, "Well, it's your choice. You don't have to go, but I think you should because it sounds like fun." And what's the worst thing that's going to happen? You're going to get a lower grade. You've worked really hard during the summer. You've passed one class with a 90 some odd in the class, and you have this other class. And worst case scenario, you get a C. You should go. Go have fun. And she chose not to. But she knows why I think she should go.
Yeah.
And now she made her own choice, which was different than what I recommended. And that's okay because she understands that I was calling out the fact her premise was incorrect, even though she should have. I still think she should have gone and had fun.
There, you described early on. I wrote down your kids should know the stewardship more than how stewardship works, more than they love you. Right? That's more important.
Yeah.
And you just you it's interesting. My wife used to get on to me when I would try if she would. My wife spoke. What's the book? Women are from Venus, men are from Mars.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, um, I mean, 20 years after we got married, at one point she said, "I would think you would know what I mean now. We've been married for 20 years." And I said, "I don't think you understand.
Yeah.
I'll never understand your language because I'm a Martian and you're, a beautiful Venetian."
Venetian.
Yes.
Yep.
Because my wife would say things in a roundabout way. And I sometimes thought she did that because one of the ways I showed her I love her was to figure out what she was trying to say. Instead of saying, go to
Okay.
the store and get this, she would say, "It would be really great if we could make cookies tomorrow, and everything was there, you know, or and that maybe that's even too clear. She'd be even more vague, right?
Sure.
Kyle, I need you to go to the store and get me chocolate chips and baking powder. I don't know what goes into cookies. But anyway, she was so right. She was so vague. And I would say, oh, okay, yeah, that does sound good tomorrow. And then later on, she would come back and say, are you going to go to Walmart like I asked? And I'm like, what? I didn't catch that part. Right.
Yeah.
And so and she would say, I told you specifically you need to go to Walmart and get these things. And I'd be like, no, you said cookies tomorrow would be great. And we needed these items. Right. But
Yeah.
she didn't
Mm-hmm.
care for me to clarify with her. She didn't like it when I clarified, right? And so to hear when you're talking with your wife and daughter, you're clarifying things in it. And I remember that being a point of sometimes contention with my wife because she didn't like it when I clarified. She just wanted me to go and do based on
Hmm.
a grouping, right? And it's an
Yeah.
interesting thing. It's an interesting way to, you know, there's I think we have to work with each of our kids independently. You know, we are talking about principles,
Yep.
but
We
to
are.
go back to and to go back to stewardship, you know, one of my sons called me a while back and said, "Hey, can we get the family together?" I said, "Sure, what's going on?" He said, "I'll tell you when we get there." Right? So we got the family together and he set us all down and he started talking about somebody he knew that had committed suicide.
Hmm.
And, you know, I let him finish. And then when he was done, I pulled him aside and I said, maybe I wasn't clear on how stewardship works here, son.
Yeah.
So next time, if you say, let's get the family together, you're going to have to give me some real serious details because I get my family together, right? You get your family together with you and your wife.
Yep.
So I don't think my youngest kids, I have stewardship over my kids, you included forever, but I'm not going to, it's not my job to tell you what to do. It's to be a counsel, right? But I can tell you right now, my twins need to
Mm-hmm.
hear that. My youngest kids did not need to hear that. I don't appreciate the way you came at it from me and wouldn't tell me. So I want you to know next time, and I'm going to, you know, I have stewardship. If you decide we need to get together, I'm going to understand every detail and I'll decide whether we get together or not.
Yep.
Now, does that seem unkind to you as my son? It may seem that way. That's not what I'm trying to do. I'm just trying to establish how this works so that moving forward, we don't have these issues again. Right. And, you know, the idea that kids understand that stewardship, and I think you mentioned that your parents' needs, right, may take priority now, and we can decide as parents how that works. You know what I mean? Because I also think
Mm-hmm.
there may be some adults who have parents that you've got to create boundaries with, right?
Sure.
I mean, because there are people out there that'll abuse boundaries and create turmoil over those that I have stewardship over, and I can't allow that, right? You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And if I sniff that out, or if it becomes a pattern, I've gone to my mom before and I said, "Listen, mom, you can't do this in my home." My mom, right? And said, "If you're going to do that, I can't let you come in. That's not how my home works." Now, I'm not telling you not to do that. I'm just telling you can't be doing that in my home, right? And if you continue to do that in my home, you won't come in my home. Now, I don't want that. I don't
Yep.
want that. But that is where this will go, you know. So let's create, and maybe that goes back to establishing baselines and where people fall and what, you know, where things, you know, and that gives our kids some guidance too to see that those kind of things happen, right? Learning how to,
Mm-hmm.
and that could be go for, you know, our kids creating boundaries for us and our kids might be more important than them loving us too, right? Having boundaries that if they cross,
Mm-hmm.
that is not acceptable. Yeah. How would we say that,
Yeah.
Tim?
Behavior wise.
Yeah.
So there are certain behaviors that mean that we won't have a relationship. And I've expressed that to each of my adult children. I have 4 adult children now, and my teenage children know that this is a thing. My youngest two that are preteen, they don't know it. They're not old enough
Right.
to get to that yet. But when they start to become teenagers, I explain to them that I want a relationship with them long term. There will be certain things that make it impossible for me to have a relationship with them. And everybody knows that the number one thing that would make it impossible for me to have a relationship with them is any type of disrespect to their mom. And then it's disrespect to me or promoting to their siblings things that go against the standards that we have adopted in our home. Now, that language is on
Right.
purpose. I don't say my standards. I talk about the standards that we have adopted and we strive to get to because we fail, but it's not my standard, it's God's standard. I'm trying to understand his standards better and try and follow them better. So, if they are promoting breaking the standards that we have adopted, I won't be able to continue a relationship with them.
Okay. I want to.
But if they're living differently, that's okay. They just it's the promotion that I draw the line at.
So that's a good place for us to draw a little mental map, because I think all too often I see strained relationships where, um, and I'm fleshing this out as I'm fleshing out my thoughts as I talk. So I hope I don't. I'm probably going to be scattered here. And
Okay.
the idea that you have to create boundaries with your own kids, doesn't mean you don't love them. In some cases, it's because you love them that you create those boundaries, right? So
Yeah.
love is always, if we have a greater than sign, love is going to trump boundaries, but you can love somebody and still have those boundaries, right? I don't know if that's, or
Sure.
or maybe love equals boundaries.
Having boundaries does not. Yeah, I would actually say that if you love someone, you have boundaries. And if you it, I love the saying mending fences. I grew up where that was a normal thing. Here in Idaho, if you want to if you want to make up with someone, you mend your fence.
Yeah.
And what that really means is you establish the boundaries. Hey, let's put our fence back in order because you cross the line or I cross the line. So we need to establish where the line is, where the fence is, where let's mend that fence so my cattle doesn't wander onto your land and destroy your vegetable patch and your animal doesn't bark at, my kid in the sandbox. Whatever it is, let's mend the fence. Let's put up that boundary because that is where our relationship can be maintained. And if you love somebody, sorry, now I have a pop song going through my
Yeah.
mind. They're always on your mind, right? If you love somebody, sorry.
Yeah.
Anyway, if you love someone, you're going to put in boundaries.
Yeah. I,
And that
I really love that, Cameron.
we can look at our Father in heaven as the example because he loves us. And so he gives us boundaries. And he said, look, I want you to return to me. This is how it's through my son. That's how you approach me. You want to come to me? Go through my son.
Yeah.
You can't do it on your own. You got to go through him. Here are the steps.
And
This is what you got to
I
do.
love that analogy. That's better than anything I was coming up with, because mending a fence with someone establishes a boundary that you can work with.
Or
And because
it repairs
it
one.
repairs one. I've seen
Yeah.
parent-child relationships where parents are overbearing into grown adults relationships and business. And you know I saw a I saw a lady furious one day. She was walking out of Walmart with her son, her little boy, cute little boy,
Okay.
and she was just angry about something. And I could tell she was really angry. And I'm a curious guy, and I probably shouldn't be this way all the time. But I said, "Are you doing okay?" Because I have an ability to brighten people's lives, and I like to use it. Sometimes I fail
Yeah,
miserably at my attempts, and
sure.
this lady was walking out with a cute little boy, and he was probably 5 or 6. And I said, "Are you okay?" And she said, I'm angry at my mom because I dropped off my son at her house and she cut his hair, right? And I told her not to, right? And
Whoa.
I know,
Okay.
and I was like, "Oh, I get it, I get it." And it looked like she wanted to talk to somebody, and so I got an earful for the next 10 minutes,
I
which
bet.
I think I don't remember a lot about it, but I do remember her little boy had the biggest grin on his face the whole time. It was grinning from ear to ear. He wasn't affected by his mom's frustration, right? And it was, and the haircut was dadgum cute. I don't know what his hair looked like before, but he was a happy,
Yeah.
bubbly little 5-year old, and mom was just out of sorts. And so she got it off her chest a little bit and had a chance to talk about it. And then they kind of went on their way, and it made me. And she even talked about that. I can't let my son go to her house anymore if she's gonna not abide by what I say. I'm this little boy's mom. She can't just do whatever she wants with my son, right? When you
Right.
said
Yeah.
mending fences, the one way to do that is to tear the fence down and build a chasm that can't be crossed, right? A moat,
Yeah. Dig a moat,
which
put up a
you
wall.
see families
Yeah.
doing this with each other. They'll turn their backs on each other and they don't have a relationship, you know?
Yeah.
And I think she was on the edge of doing that at this point because her mom had done too much. I mean, she had crossed a line, an imaginary line that this, well, not imaginary, a line this mom had. And, you know, I can't, it's her son, right? It's hard to argue with her
That's right.
approach to it. But
I asked her not to cut his hair. She cut his hair.
yeah,
Okay. That that's pretty. That's so disrespectful to the wishes of the one who has stewardship.
yeah,
And I've heard this from not my mom is ideal,
yeah,
right? She's constantly checking with me. Hey, I'm gonna do this thing. Is this all right? I'm like, oh yeah, absolutely. I have so much trust in her. If she said, hey, I'm gonna do this thing, I automatically want to say yes. Even if it's not something I would like. She's just got great judgment. But I have another relative who has said this in my presence. She says, well, I'm the grandma. And I just looked at her and I was like, uh huh, you are the grandma. So get in your
yeah,
place, lady. I didn't say that, but
yeah,
she has she has struggled in her role with her grandbabies. And luckily I've watched this and I've learned a lot from her on how I'm going to be as a granddad.
yeah.
Which, hey, 3 marriages this year. Chances are I'm going to have a grandbaby, maybe even before you do.
Maybe so. Maybe so. Yeah. And then you got it. Then your stewardship, it remains, but it changes, right? It remains, but it
Well,
changes.
earlier you said that my stewardship will always exist. My stewardship for my sons does continue to exist as the father,
Yeah.
but my stewardship as a dad for my daughters completely changes.
Right. Right.
I
Yeah.
don't have
For daughters. Yep.
I
You're
I
right.
don't have that. It's different. So,
Yeah. You play a secondary role
but
in a support mechanism to their husbands for sure. And see, and
that's
maybe
right.
that's what we're talking about here is something to establish is to how that stewardship should work by our actions and then abide by our own actions, even if, and you've talked about this before, we know sometimes decisions are going to end up being painful for people. I had all my on Mother's Day, all my kids come to church with me, right? Not
Cool.
not on Father's Day, on Mother's Day. They all show up to say,
I get that.
yeah,
Oh,
and it's a sweet thing to do, yeah. And
yeah.
and we see a some grandparents walk in with grandkids, you know, and they're bringing their grandkids to church, which is a valiant thing to do, you know.
Agreed. Yeah.
And my son said to me, my son knows me pretty well. I think he asks me questions he knows the answer to because he wants me to say it, you know.
Okay. Sure.
He said, "What do you think of that, Dad?" And I said, "That's a beautiful thing. That's a valiant thing to do, you know." And he says, "Do they bring him every week?" And I said, "Yeah, that grandchild comes with grandma and grandpa every week." And he said to me, "Are you going to take my kids to church if I don't go to church, Dad?" And
Hmm. That's interesting.
I said, "You know what? I did my best to raise you. You're on your own, sucker. That's a you deal. I have raised you as good as I could." And he just started laughing because he said, "How did I know? How did I know you would say that?" And I said, "You know what? I really appreciate the kindness and beauty of others. And when they sacrifice, you know, I said, and maybe the fact that I won't do it, absolutely won't, might be a reason that you do it, And I don't know. I'm if I saw that occurrence happen, that might change, right?
Yeah.
But
Uh,
more likely, I would have a long conversation with you and almost beg you and say, "Listen, the source of my happiness, and you grew up in a family where the source of our happiness was this way. Hopefully, you'll continue that, right? Now, it's your stewardship." And
yeah.
I don't know what would happen. I mean, we can say we'll do a lot of things until they happen, and then we tend to change, right? We tend to make different decisions. And again, I'm all for that sweet couple bringing their grandson to church every Sunday. I think it's a beautiful thing. I think they're a wonderful couple to be able to do that. Will I do it right now? No, that's you, bro. I ain't doing it. Now, I don't know how I'll feel. I mean, who knows, right?
Yeah. You know what's funny? If you told me that thought
Yeah,
experiment, my answer is yes. If my kids, if the parents are okay with me taking the kids to church, I'm going to take them to church because I was inactive. Have you ever been inactive as a parent?
yeah, I have.
Because I
Well,
have.
not as a parent, yeah, I haven't
See,
as a parent. Yeah,
so I know what my own struggles were, and if my mom had offered to take my kids to church, I would have been so grateful because I recognized the value of what I received growing up by going to
right,
church.
right,
And because of my own faults and because of my own struggles and because of my own self-centeredness, I wasn't going to church. I wasn't spiritually minded.
right,
But if my mom had come to me and said, "Hey, Cameron, could I take your kids to church?" I would have been like, "Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you." Now, and that would not have postponed my returning or my embracing of becoming active or spiritually minded. It would not have delayed it at all. My journey back to Christ had nothing to do with my kids. There was not that impulse of, "Oh, well, I better do this for them." No. If people haven't been listening to this and haven't figured out that I do very little because of my kids and because of a hope for them to do something different, no, that's not how I operate.
right,
It's not because of them. It's not bottom up. It's top down. And when I recognized that I had a gap in my life, I wanted to mend that. I wanted to fix that. I wanted to get right with God. And so I actively started to work on it. And you know what? If my mom had said, "Hey, could I take the kids to church because it's good?" I've been like, "Yes, please do. I do recognize it's good. I just can't bring myself to do that right now."
right,
So, if my any of my kids, if any of them are local and my grandkids aren't going to church, I'm going to talk to them and say, "Hey, how would you feel about me taking them to church?" And the nice thing is I can talk to them about when I wasn't going to church, when I had kids. As a parent, I wasn't going to church.
Yeah. And you just, you've, it's, you've made me, I wouldn't say rethink it, but I also started by saying, I don't know what I'll do if it happens, right? Which is an interesting,
Right. Yeah.
I have this mentality right now, and I have these thoughts right now. But again, I don't know. I like to give myself the opportunity to change my mind based on prayer
Yes.
and and forgiveness and kindness and all those things. I think that are should be part of our normal, right? The normal way we do things, right? And I
Hmm.
wrote down top down, which I love that, Cameron. Top down is a beautiful way to look at how we as as men manage our families and our lives. And a lot of the things that we do, it should be top down, right? And
Yeah.
here's what I would suggest in it being top down. I'm famous for saying to people, when you serve selflessly, people reciprocate. They can't help it. Now, sometimes it takes a long time,
Sure.
but I'm telling you, when I started serving my wife and my kids selflessly with all these parameters in place, they knew where I stood between right and wrong. They knew the priorities of where they fall. They knew I loved them.
Hmm.
They knew I had stewardship. They understood all these things, right? But I served. But
Yeah.
I served. And I loved serving because the productive narcissist in me, I loved the way it made me feel, number one. And that's important to me to feel like I'm doing the right things for the right reasons. Number two, I didn't care so much about reciprocity, and I learned that from my son on the spectrum. The reciprocity I get from him isn't as important as my willingness to serve him in a spirit of love, right? It has to be that way
Right.
for my sanity, right? But thirdly, when you serve, I told a guy one time, I help out around the house a lot. I always have. And there's a couple of things that only
Yep.
I do because I know my wife hates it, and I feel like I'm showing her a deeper level.
Dishes,
That's
laundry.
it. The kids don't even get to do it. Yeah.
Yep.
Because I go in there now and I feel her presence when I do those things, which is crazy, but you know, let me have it, right? I need it.
It's
Yeah,
sweet.
but I
Yeah.
also, so it's not just because of the way it makes me feel, and it's not just because of, you know, uh, I can't be taken advantage of when I'm doing things for the right reason. I can't be taken advantage of when I do things for the right reason, right? And that's a powerful
Yeah.
thing for me. But the third thing is the reciprocity eventually it shows up. When you put the needs of your wife and kids, with all this said, with all these things, they're more important than our kids loving us. You and I still both probably put their needs ahead of our own. In a lot
Of
of
course, because we love
we love,
them. We just don't care about whether or not we get that reciprocity, whatever it's called.
yeah, we love them so much that we don't care if they love us. I'll,
That's
I'll tell
right.
you, but the reciprocity comes, and it, not just through my own personal feelings and my productive narcissism, and not just through uh, feeling like I can't be taken advantage of because I do things because I
Yeah.
want to, but you'll get it back. I mean, it's inevitable that when you do these things for the right reasons, you'll get it back. When you create boundaries and when you establish parameters and when your kids know you love your wife more than them, that matters to them and it matters in a good way, right? And so
Hmm.
the
Yeah.
reciprocity starts to flow. Um, so I think if those people are listening, saying, "Well, how could you love something? How could it not be important to you that your kids love you?" I go back to a story where my son Eric, he has different ways of expressing his disdain for me. There's normal ways.
Okay.
Yeah, there's normal ways. For instance, there's two ways to get to our living room from the stairs. You can go around through the main room or through the hall. He'll go the opposite
All
way of
right.
me, right? So he doesn't have to pass by me. He won't sit next to me at the kitchen table. He won't walk next to me in a grocery store. He's 4 steps behind in my blind spot. He just, even though we're doing things he likes, he's just developed these habits of not. He's got some, but then there are times where he does some stuff that hurts my heart. You know, I
Mm.
mean, one day I came downstairs and I have a couple of pictures of Shelly on a little whiteboard near our kitchen table. You know, we have family pictures, and I came down and they
Yeah.
were on the floor crushed,
Oh,
and it hurt, you know.
I bet. Yeah.
And so I flattened them out and hung them up back up in their crumpled state. They'll never be the same, you know.
Yeah.
But I don't care if he does that because I love him so much, right? I care so much about him that I'm not. I know he's just expressing himself in weird ways and unusual ways, and at least he didn't hit me, right? I mean, that's better than me, right? That's better. There's a lot of things he could do that are worse than that. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And I think
Mm-hmm.
that the bottom line is I love him so much that I don't care about that. I care about him
Yep.
feeling the love, right? Another time I came into our living room, we have a canvas photo of our family, and I looked kind of closely, and where my face is, it was dented in, right? The canvas is stretched and it was dented in. And so I looked a little closer. There's a
Okay.
pinhole in my neck in the picture, right? And I didn't even have to ask. I know what he did. He was mad at me. He came home. He came and got a pin and stuck it in him. And again, this is right. This is for some people. This is probably shocking. It's probably, oh my gosh, your son would do that to a picture of you? Yeah, he would. Right? And
Yeah.
and the reality is I hung it back up and I left it there, pinhole and all, dent in the picture, right? Now my kids come home and my other kids see it and they are mad. You know, Dad, you can't let him act like this. You can't let him lash out in these ways. And I say, you know what? I love him. I don't care. That's the way he expressed himself. He and I have talked about those things since then when emotions were more reasonable.
Right.
And so,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I love him so much that I can't care if he loves me, right? My love for him has to be more important than me caring about if he treats me or loves me back, right? And so
Yeah.
those are extreme examples, and that most people don't have to don't I'll say don't get to feel that, you know,
Okay.
because I feel like they've given me a glimpse into kind of how God feels about us, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just absolutely unconditional. And no matter what we do, right? No matter how we act or how we can even deny his existence. And he loves us so much he doesn't care. He doesn't care if we love him back.
Yep.
He wants us to. He desires us to return to him because of his love. And I think that's the core of what we're talking
Mm-hmm.
about here. Our desire for our kids is to want to be kind and and want to return. Our mission is bigger than us as parents. Right?
Yeah.
You and our mission is bigger than us. It's God. It's God first, spouses next, and then kids, right? And so
Yep.
when we can be submissive to that mission, a lot of these make more sense, right? They know where we stand between
Yeah.
right and wrong. They know where they fall in the priorities. Uh, they know we love them, and because we do discipline them sometimes, we do have to give them harsh reality sometimes. But they know we love them because of that, and they understand stewardship, right? And so
Yep.
those are four good, I think, things that we can take away from this, and hopefully we've described.
I
Go
were
ahead.
I wrote this down from what you said. I wrote down love your kids enough that you don't care if they love you back.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's right, if that's the right way to say it yet, but it sure did ring true for me listening to you talk about Eric
Yeah.
with his cognitive disability and his emotional limitations and how he's currently able to express himself. And it's funny because as I think about what I would do, for me, I would just be latched on to someday, someday after the resurrection,
Yeah.
maybe then, maybe
So
then.
I have,
Because that trial, listening to you talk about it, that would be so hard for
well,
me.
I feel I'm grateful. I had an experience, and I don't know if it was a dream or just me thinking this, but I had a very vivid experience where uh, we were in the afterlife, and
Mm-hmm.
he was standing across the room from me, and he saw me, and you could immediately tell everything was restored, his full
Uh-huh.
capabilities, and he
Yeah,
smiled at me really big, and he ran towards me and hugged me and said, "Thank you for taking such good care of me." And that right there is really I have to reframe how I feel about him regularly.
I
And
bet.
that
Yeah.
is the frame that I always fall back to, right? I can be miserable and discouraged till I die about this. And I would imagine
Mm-hmm.
he's still going to run to me and say and embrace me. Or I can, you know, take it for what it's worth and try to live happily and maybe pour some happiness and joy on him until I receive that
Sure.
embrace. So it's really up to me. I mean, I've got choices here, you know. Now, yeah, so that's really how I see it, and I think that's how we need to see our all of our kids is their unlimited potential, right? And even if we never receive that embrace, that the fact that we love them is more important than that even, right? The more important than
Mm-hmm.
that
Yep.
embrace is us expressing our love consistently and creating a world where we can establish those things that help them to, move forward in happiness and hope and, again, know where the source of our happiness comes from. So
Great way to end it. Thanks,
thanks,
Kyle.
Cameron.